The shrill alarm of the gate speaker cut through the morning hum of Chicago O'Hare like a blade. Everyone froze. A man in a worn grey hoodie stood perfectly still at the entrance to the boarding area, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his eyes locked on the metal scanner. So you cannot pass a voice called sharply authoritative, yet uncertain. Heads turned. Phones rose instinctively. The air thickened with disbelief, a collective pause that held every traveler hostage for a heartbeat. Few knew that this seemingly ordinary passenger was about to rewrite the rules of what power could do in a single airport terminal. John Whitman exhaled slowly, shoulders tense, but grounded, feeling the weight of every eye on him. At 45, he looked like any man who had flown too many nights in a row, the dark circles under his eyes, a quiet testament to relentless work, not indulgence. His suit from decades ago was frayed at the elbows. His sneakers scuffed his hair, tousled under the hood. Nobody would guess the scale of the empire he controlled. Whitman Logistics, moving nearly half of all domestic aviation, fuel the invisible arteries of commercial flight across the northern United States. Tonight he was just a passenger. Tonight he was invisible, or at least that was what the airline staff thought. The terminal was slick with rain, neon reflections from the glass walls scattering across puddles like fractured light. The PA system droned announcements about delayed flights, gate changes and boarding zones, but John barely noticed. His eyes tracked the line of passengers filing toward the first-class lounge, each step precise, measured. The man in the tailored navy suit ahead of him, clearly a regular VIP, barked into a phone with practiced authority, his voice echoing arrogance. John noted the sharp contrast between him and the passengers, who had no idea that the man in the hoodie could command the very planes they would soon board. Behind the counter gate agent, Lisa Turner shifted uneasily, scanning boarding passes with a distracted air. John handed hers over with a calm nod, the screen lighting up green. He stepped through the scanner and walked the jet bridge, the sterile cold of the tunnel, pressing against his face, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the first-class cabin. Leather lie-flat pods, warm ambient light, the faint scent of champagne luxury, intended to impress to signify exclusivity. He paused just outside his assigned seat, watching. Every detail mattered. He had seen these spaces countless times, but today the narrative would change. 2 steps away, cabin crew leader Meredith Blake approached her badge, gleaming under the soft light. Her smile was tight, professional, but the sharpness in her eyes betrayed suspicion. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" she asked. Her tone was polite, but had the precise chill of someone used to asserting power over people she presumed beneath her. John slid his phone forward. Boarding pass glowing seat 1A confirmed. Meredith's gaze lingered. She frowned, slightly glanced toward the entrance and then back at him. The man in the navy suit tapped his foot impatiently, his expression folding into a smirk of assumed superiority. Meredith's words were slow, deliberate. "Sir, there appears to be a conflict. Seat 1A has been double booked." She looked toward the man ahead in the suit. "Mr. Landon holds a priority platinum membership. His status overrides standard bookings in the event of conflict. We're going to need you to move." A flicker of heat rose at the back of John's neck, but his voice remained even. "Move," where she swiped her tablet, scrolling. "Economy plus row 22, middle seat, extra leg room." The audacity of the request was tangible, like smoke curling across the cabin. They wanted him to trade a $3,000 lie-flat pod for a middle seat in the back, so Mr. Landon could remain comfortable. John lowered the headphones around his neck and leaned forward. The calm intensity in his eyes was not invitation, it was warning. "I am not moving," he said. His tone was soft, yet every word carried the weight of authority that Meredith could not dismiss. "I have a valid contract of carriage. I am seated. I am not intoxicated. I am not belligerent. I am not a security threat. You are attempting to downgrade me involuntarily to accommodate a status member. That is a violation of federal regulations and a breach of common sense." Her face flushed red, the control she wielded over the cabin faltering slightly. The man in the suit leaned forward, sneering. "Come on, buddy. You're holding up the flight. Take the voucher, go back to coach where you fit in." The cabin went quiet. Every first-class passenger suddenly tuned in, though many pretended to look at their phones. John stood his height, 6 feet, 3 broad shoulders carved by years of rowing demeanor, calm but impenetrable. "I suggest you check the manifest again," John said, deliberately using her name. "Look at the code next to my name. It should indicate an SEK or GS. Do you know what that means?" Meredith hesitated, caught between procedure and doubt. The smirk of the man in the suit faltered. John's phone buzzed in his pocket. In seconds, he sent an encrypted message to Sarah Jennings, Chief Legal Counsel of Whitman Logistics. Crew attempting involuntary bump bias, involved documenting everything. Protocol activated. Within minutes, the plane remained stationary auxiliary systems running on reserve fuel. Engines idled. The cabin temperature rose slightly. A subtle but growing tension filled the enclosed space. From the economy section, a young passenger, barely 20, filmed the entire incident. The little red recording dot was witness enough. Security arrived hesitant, the officer's hands hovering unsure of the situation. John stood calmly, letting the misjudgments of others solidify. He was not reacting. He was calculating. Every movement of the crew, every subtle glance of the passengers, every delay fed into the unfolding pattern he had prepared for years. 3 hours ago, he had flown in from Los Angeles, negotiating critical contracts, exhausted and yet sharp. In 30 seconds, he could trigger consequences that would ripple through the airline. Yet he remained quiet, letting each player reveal their bias, arrogance, and ignorance. This was not revenge yet. It was proof. Proof that assumptions based on appearances were not just foolish, they were expensive. In row 1, the man in the suit fidgeted, realizing the scale of his misjudgment. Meredith's hands trembled slightly, the authority she had wielded with precision now undermined by the quiet power of the man she had dismissed. The cameras in the terminal, the whispers of employees, the live stream, everything converged. And John Whitman, disguised and underestimated, stood at the center of it, calm, precise, in full control of consequences they could not yet see. The storm had only just begun. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as John remained in seat 1A, his gaze fixed on the small red dot blinking on the phone held by the young passenger across the aisle. Every movement, every hesitation of the crew was magnified under his scrutiny. The man in the suit, Richard Landon, tapped his fingers nervously against the armrest, his confident mask slipping as he realized he was no longer in control. Meredith Miller's posture stiffened. She adjusted her scarf as though it could somehow shield her from the weight of judgment she had ignored until now. 2 rows back, a couple whispered to one another, exchanging uneasy glances. The air was thick with anticipation, yet John's presence remained calm, almost imperceptible in its intensity. He pulled a small notebook from his duffel, and began jotting down subtle observations, the way Meredith's hand lingered over the manifest, the way Landon's eyes darted toward her for confirmation, the shallow breaths of the other flight attendants as they fidgeted with service cards. Each note was a calculation, a record of human behavior and error under pressure. The galley door opened quietly, and cabin attendant Rebecca Klein stepped in, pushing the trolley with measured efficiency. Her face was professional, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as they landed on John. She had served countless first-class passengers, yet the aura emanating from the man in the hoodie was something unfamiliar, something quietly authoritative. She reminded herself to maintain composure, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the beverage cart. Every tray she lifted seemed heavier, as if the weight of unseen accountability pressed down on her. John's attention shifted to the cockpit door, noting the subtle tension in the captain's shoulders. Captain Miller, a man in his late 50s with graying temples, had walked out earlier. To assess the situation, his authoritative tone meant to assert control. Yet even he had hesitated, caught between protocol and instinctive recognition that something about this passenger defied his assumptions. John recorded the way Miller's jaw tightened when Landon approached, whispering words meant only for him, but audible to anyone observing closely. The ripple of human tension was like a live wire stretching across the cabin, and John traced each spark. As the flight attendants prepared for service, John noticed the subtle hierarchy at play. Junior crew members hesitated near the trolleys, deferring to senior attendants, with each question, each glance. He observed the way the youngest, a timid man named Carter, shifted weight nervously from one foot to the other, his eyes darting to John and then quickly away. He wasn't certain why, but instinctively, he sensed that this passenger was not ordinary. Carter's unease was a silent testament to the latent power John carried, unseen, yet palpable. The intercom crackled a soft voice, announcing turbulence expected over the Midwest. A subtle smile tugged at John's lips. The timing was perfect. The hum of engines, the gentle vibration through the fuselage, all served as a backdrop to the unfolding theater of human behavior. He leaned slightly, adjusting the headphones around his neck, and took in a deep breath. Every heartbeat in the cabin was mirrored by an internal rhythm of calculations, weighing human error, protocol, and consequence. Meredith returned, clipboard in hand, her eyes narrowing as she approached John again. "Sir, I need to verify your seating assignment one final time. There's been a discrepancy flagged in the system." Her voice was firm, but the falter beneath it was unmistakable. John's lips curved slightly. "I suggest you check the manifest carefully. Seat 1A, John Whitman, Platinum member confirmed. There should be no errors." The subtle authority in his voice carried weight far beyond its volume. Meredith exhaled sharply, a quiet acknowledgement of the misjudgment she had committed, though unspoken. From the back, Landon muttered under his breath, an audible but impotent expression of frustration. "This doesn't make sense. He can't just..." His voice trailed off as he realized no one would listen, and the cabin's attention had shifted subtly but completely. Every flight attendant, every passenger with peripheral awareness understood that the balance of authority had shifted, not overtly, not with spectacle, but with an undeniable clarity. John reached for his phone and typed rapidly a series of encrypted messages sent to Sarah Jennings and David Ross, his CFO. Each message contained precise instructions: monitor crew behavior, document every interaction, initiate, review protocols post-flight. He didn't need immediate compliance from the airline. What mattered was evidence observation and timing. The air in the cabin thickened with unspoken acknowledgement that something critical was unfolding, yet nobody could articulate it fully. As the beverage service began, John's attention narrowed to individual gestures, the tilt of a head, the subtle tightening of fists, the minute hesitation before a tray was set. Each gesture revealed the human frailty behind uniformed authority. He saw Carter hand a beverage to Landon, his hand shaking imperceptibly. He saw Rebecca Klein's eyes flicked briefly toward the cockpit before settling on her task. The dance of protocol and fear was intricate, almost balletic, and John catalogued each move silently. Suddenly, a passenger from row 3 shifted inadvertently, bumping into Landon's elbow. The man in the suit flinched, muttering a curse under his breath, the sound audible only to those nearby. John's attention sharpened. Small disruptions, he knew, often revealed the true character of those around him. Landon's reaction was defensive, aggressive yet clumsy, a visible crack in the armor he projected. John's mind noted the sequence: insult, tension, hesitation, correction. Every action had consequence, and the crew was revealing the trajectory of their own misjudgments. Meredith returned once more, her hands clenched slightly around the clipboard, her eyes darting nervously toward the cockpit, and then to John. "So there's an issue with Mr. Landon's priority code," she admitted quietly, almost as if confessing to herself. "It seems the system flagged the double booking incorrectly." Her voice faltered on the last word, and John's gaze, calm yet unyielding, met hers. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement that her authority was under observation, measured and evaluated. The cabin door closed with a soft thud. Turbulence from the Midwest storm rattled the fuselage gently. Outside, a rain-streaked tarmac gleamed under fluorescent lights, workers in safety vests moving luggage with hurried precision. Inside, John's presence radiated control despite his disguised appearance. He allowed a subtle smile to touch his lips. This was not confrontation. This was revelation. The crew, the passengers, the system itself were all providing evidence of behavior, biases, and decisions under pressure. The plane was a microcosm of authority and assumption, and John was quietly orchestrating its exposure. Carter, standing near the rear trolley, caught John's eye briefly. The young man's face went pale, a flicker of recognition or intuition, perhaps. John gave nothing away. A simple nod, imperceptible but charged, was all. Carter looked away, unsure whether he imagined it. The tension in the cabin was taut like a drawn bowstring. Every gesture, every glance, every hesitation mattered now. John's presence was a lens, focusing the chaotic energy of human judgment into clarity. Every micro-expression became a story, every unspoken thought a potential consequence. From the corner of his eye, John saw a child recording the scene on a small tablet, unaware of the gravity beyond the immediate drama. The tiny red recording dot was the only silent witness needed to cement what was unfolding. His hands were calm movements, precise, every tap on the phone calculated. Each encrypted message, each notation in his notebook prepared the eventual resolution. John's storm was quiet, internal, and infinitely more powerful than any outburst could have been. A subtle twist arrived when the plane's auxiliary power began a minor fluctuation, causing a ripple of unease among the crew. It was natural, technical, explainable, but the timing was perfect. John observed it, as one might observe a chessboard, noting how fear and authority interacted. Even the captain, experienced and composed, glanced toward the cabin with a fraction of uncertainty, a human crack in the professional facade. The dynamics shifted imperceptibly. Observation alone had begun to fracture the illusion of control. The boarding process slowed naturally as the combination of rain, minor turbulence, and subtle tension compounded. Landon's arrogance began to fray. He tapped his foot, glanced repeatedly at the manifest, whispered to the flight attendant next to him. Meredith's composure wavered in small but visible ways. John's eyes, steady and calculating, followed the ebb and flow of each human response. Nothing escaped notice. Each pause, each hesitated breath, each involuntary glance was catalogued, analyzed, and recorded. By the time beverage service concluded, a pattern had emerged. The crew's hierarchy, the passengers' perceptions, and the invisible network of authority within the cabin had been exposed in full relief. John Whitman, a man in plain clothing, had turned the microcosm of a first-class cabin into a living laboratory, each reaction a data point, each misjudgment a lesson. Nothing had been overt. Nothing had required confrontation beyond a few well-timed questions and gestures, yet the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering the fuselage with relentless precision, lightning illuminating the tarmac. Inside the quiet intensity of observation, patience, and subtle command had created a new reality. John sat back in seat 1A, the calm center of a quietly chaotic environment, knowing that the seeds of revelation had been sown and that the unfolding consequences would follow in due time. The intercom crackled a faint static preceding the voice of the captain, calm but carrying the gravity of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for departure. Please remain seated and fasten your seat belts." The cabin responded automatically, clicks and rustles of seat belts, tightening bags, shifting in overhead bins. John Whitman's eyes didn't leave the crew. Every motion was deliberate, every hesitation noted. The minor turbulence rattling the fuselage was background noise inconsequential against the larger storm he was quietly orchestrating. Meredith Miller approached again, her clipboard held like a shield. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, the faint tremor of anxiety visible in her jaw. She leaned slightly, voice controlled but brittle. "Sir, for your safety and compliance with Airline's procedure, you need to move to your reassigned seat." The calm in her tone failed to mask the undercurrent of panic. John didn't respond immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch the weight of it, pressing against the cabin air, each passenger holding their breath without realizing it. Richard Landon shifted in his seat, his smirk replaced by a subtle unease. His hands clenched on the armrest as he watched John trying to assess, trying to anticipate. A passenger, a few rows back, whispered to her companion, eyes wide. The cabin crew junior attendants hesitated mid-step, exchanging glances that betrayed their uncertainty. John finally spoke low and steady. "I am seated in my assigned position, fully compliant, fully sober, and I have no intention of moving. Any further attempts to force compliance will be documented and reported immediately." His voice carried a weight that was tangible, almost physical, pressing against the assumptions of authority around him. From the galley, Rebecca Klein's fingers froze mid-adjustment of a tray. She exhaled slowly, her eyes meeting John's for a fraction of a second. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps understanding, passed silently between them. She adjusted her stance deliberately, creating distance careful to obey protocol, while recalibrating her perception of the passenger she had underestimated. Across the cabin, Carter, the young junior attendant, shifted nervously, aware that the dynamics had altered beyond routine service. He glanced at the captain, then at John, caught between obedience and intuition. Meredith cleared her throat, a controlled attempt at authority, but her voice faltered slightly. "Sir, the system flagged a priority conflict with Seat 1A. The assignment must be corrected." Her eyes flicked toward the cockpit, searching for reinforcement, and for a moment, she hoped the captain would intervene. John's gaze followed her calm, unyielding, with an intensity that made the air still. "The manifest has been verified. My seat, John Whitman, Platinum member. No error exists. Any further action against me is in violation of federal carriage regulations." Captain Miller's face appeared in the corner of the galley window, silver hair catching the overhead lights, eyes narrowing in measured scrutiny. He was experienced, a veteran of decades of flights, yet uncertainty crept into his expression. John's calm authority, subtle yet absolute, had shifted the balance of power without a single raised voice. The captain's first instinct was procedure, but his second was recognition. He felt, in some intangible way, that this passenger carried influence far beyond his comprehension. A subtle twist emerged as Landon, growing desperate, leaned toward Meredith, whispering under his breath. John noticed the faint motion of the head, the tightening of the shoulders, the avoidance of eye contact. It all spoke volumes. John's mind catalogued each gesture, each reaction. The young passenger filming across the aisle adjusted the tablet slightly, unaware that the minor camera movements were amplifying every nuance of human tension. The beverage service continued, a slow, deliberate ballet of trays and whispered instructions. John observed from his seat as the crew adapted each movement, tentative, careful, mindful of the silent scrutiny. A junior attendant bumped a glass, nearly spilling the champagne meant for a wealthy passenger, and immediately froze eyes, flicking to John as if expecting judgment. John did nothing outwardly, but the subtle tightening of his jaw and the slight tilt of his head communicated a quiet authority that reverberated through the cabin. Midway through the service, a minor turbulence caused a ripple of cups and napkins across the aisle. Landon cursed under his breath, and Meredith muttered directions, hands shaking imperceptibly. John remained seated, hands folded, observing the minute human reactions, cataloguing the stress, the fear, the assumptions each had made. The storm outside mirrored the storm, inside rain lashing against the fuselage, lightning splitting the sky, each flash illuminating the cabin with harsh, white clarity. John reached for his phone again, sending encrypted updates to Sarah Jennings, Chief Legal Counsel, and David Ross, CFO. Each tap was precise, deliberate, carrying the weight of anticipation. Instructions were sent for monitoring documentation and verification of every action by the crew. Nothing was immediate, nothing was punitive yet. This was strategic. Observation first, documentation next, power subtly revealed last. Suddenly, an alert from the airplane's auxiliary monitoring system registered a minor fluctuation in electrical output. Rebecca Klein's hands froze. Carter shifted nervously. Even Captain Miller's eyes flicked toward the panel in concern, though he said nothing. John noted each reaction, understanding how small, explainable incidents could catalyze human error and reveal true character. He leaned back slightly, allowing the natural flow of uncertainty to spread through the cabin, a controlled, invisible influence. Minutes later, a subtle verbal confrontation erupted between two crew members over the placement of trays. The junior attendant had placed a meal in the wrong pod, and Landon's voice rose slightly harsh, but measured, meant to assert control. The junior attendant's hands trembled. John observed, eyes calm, not intervening, letting the microcosm of authority and panic unfold. Each mistake, each hesitation, each whispered defense was evidence catalogued meticulously in his mind. A passenger across the aisle, a small boy, giggled softly, pointing at Landon's flustered expression. The boy's mother hushed him, but the moment amplified the tension. John allowed himself a faint smile. Observation had revealed biases, weaknesses, and fear. And this small, innocent moment illuminated the human cracks in the structure of assumed authority. He scribbled a note in his small notebook, capturing the psychological dynamics with surgical precision. Rebecca Klein returned to service, placing a glass carefully in front of a passenger hands. Steady now. But her eyes darted toward John once more, silently acknowledging his presence, the authority he wielded quietly unseen. Carter exhaled, adjusting his stance. Landon muttered something under his breath, glancing repeatedly at Meredith. Each gesture, each line of tension, each micro-expression contributed to the unfolding tableau of human behavior under stress. John's own internal monologue traced every potential outcome, every human response, and every possible reaction from the cockpit and the crew. Each observation fed into a larger calculus, how mistakes compounded, how assumptions about status and appearance influenced behavior, and how subtle authority properly applied could shift the course of events without a single overt confrontation. He allowed the hum of the engines, the rattle of turbulence, and the quiet murmurs of passengers to frame his calculations, creating a cinematic lens through which every minor action became significant. The storm outside intensified, rain thrashing the fuselage, wind gusting against the wing, but inside time seemed to slow. Each gesture, each hesitation, each glance became a tableau. John's presence was both still and commanding, a gravity that bent human behavior without force. He allowed Landon to fidget Meredith, to hesitate, the junior crew to tremble, and the passengers to murmur all, while he remained the calm center of the unfolding chaos. By the time the beverage service concluded, the subtle but undeniable shift had occurred. The crew's assumptions had been challenged, their biases exposed, and the microcosm of human authority within the cabin had been observed, measured, and documented. John Whitman, a man in plain clothing, had transformed the first-class cabin into a theater of revelation, each participant unknowingly performing a part that would later have consequences far beyond the aircraft. He leaned back in his seat, a quiet storm of calculation and patience, understanding that the next phase would escalate, but knowing that observation, not confrontation, had already set the stage. Outside, the storm lightened slightly, a faint grey dawn beginning to creep across the tarmac. Inside, the hum of engines and the faint smell of recycled air mingled with tension and anticipation. John's eyes, steady and calm, swept across the cabin one final time, capturing every gesture, every hesitation, every subtle flicker of awareness, knowing that when the consequences came, they would be measured, deliberate, and inescapable. The first battle had been fought with silence, patience, and quiet observation, and John Whitman had won without a single raised voice. The cabin door closed with a soft but final thud, sealing the first-class section in a bubble of tense anticipation. Outside, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, the tarmac slick and reflective under the pale morning light. Inside, John Whitman remained in seat one, a calm observing. His notebook lay open on the fold-out table pen, poised fingers drumming lightly against the page. Each crew member's movements were catalogued, each micro-expression noted. The hum of the engines was a low, constant vibration beneath the floor, a reminder of the thin line between control and chaos. Meredith Miller lingered near the galley clipboard held at her side, shifting weight uneasily. Her eyes flicked toward John repeatedly, as if trying to read him, to measure the depth of his authority, the extent of his knowledge. The initial arrogance she carried into the cabin had begun to fray the tension etched into the furrow of her brow. She straightened her posture as Landon whispered something in her ear, his voice tight with frustration. His hands clutched the armrest of his pod seat so firmly that the knuckles whitened. He was used to control, used to unquestioned compliance. John had dismantled that in a single exchange of words and presence, unseen, but felt. The beverage trolley rolled forward, a junior attendant moving cautiously, the weight of observation pressing down invisibly. Carter's hands shook slightly as he placed glasses for passengers, careful not to make contact with John. Each movement was deliberate, hesitant, conscious. John's eyes tracked him, recording, processing, considering. He allowed a subtle smile to brush across his face, not mockery, but acknowledgement of awareness. The young attendant had the opportunity to choose integrity under scrutiny, and John was noting every choice. A subtle alert from John's encrypted messages indicated acknowledgement from Sarah Jennings and David Ross. Protocol activated. Within minutes, prearranged signals within Whitman Logistics would begin cascading through the company's operational systems. The airplanes on the ground, the fuel depots, the scheduling for incoming flights, all were prepared for a controlled intervention. John didn't need panic. He did not need violence. Observation, documentation, and precise action would suffice. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside the cabin, quiet, controlled, inevitable. From the cockpit, Captain Miller adjusted his headset, noting the unusual hesitation in the cabin. The usual confidence he carried had been undermined subtly but completely. He leaned forward, hands resting lightly on the yoke, and spoke to his first officer, a younger man named Davis, who shifted uneasily in his seat. "Something's off," Miller said quietly. "Watch the cabin. Pay attention to the passenger in seat 1A. He's different." Davis nodded, unease creeping across his face. The crew had been trained to follow protocol, to react to deviation. They were now being tested by someone who appeared to be ordinary, but whose authority exceeded perception. Meredith approached John again, tentative this time. Her voice controlled, but brittle, attempted firmness. "Sir, there are procedures we need to follow. If you refuse to comply," John interrupted, calm measured. "If you attempt to remove me, all actions will be documented. Any escalation will be escalated through formal channels. I am within my rights to remain seated." The words were simple, devoid of aggression, but the authority behind them pressed against the crew like a physical weight. Meredith's shoulders tightened. Landon's hands clenched and unclenched. Carter's face paled. The equilibrium of control had shifted invisibly. A flash of movement in the cabin drew John's attention. A child, perhaps 15, was recording the interaction on a small tablet, the red dot blinking quietly. John allowed himself a brief acknowledgement, a slight nod. The digital witness ensured that every micro-decision, every gesture, every misjudgment would be captured. The passengers, though unaware of the full implications, were subconsciously aware that the dynamic had shifted. Whispers traveled across rows, subtle but pervasive. Authority was no longer a function of uniform or status. It was a measure of presence, awareness, and composure. The flight attendants began preemptive adjustments. Rebecca Klein moved with careful precision, avoiding contact with John while still performing her duties. Carter moved cautiously, almost mechanically, eyes flicking between the cockpit, John, and the senior crew. Landon fidgeted, muttering low under his breath, his usual swagger replaced by hesitation. Even Meredith, trained and practiced, now second-guessed every motion. Each micro-error, each hesitation, was a reflection of the invisible power John exerted through observation and presence, alone. John's encrypted communication prompted subtle operational changes on the ground. A message to the logistics team, discreet but definitive, initiated temporary holds at fuel depots for Horizon air flights scheduled within the next hour. It was a precaution, not a threat, but the intent was clear. Actions have consequences, and decisions under false assumptions would be recorded and evaluated. The crew, unaware, continued their duties, each move scrutinized, each gesture catalogued. Minutes passed, the hum of the engine steady the minor turbulence a background rhythm. Landon's impatience grew, his voice rising slightly as he addressed a fellow passenger with unnecessary force. Meredith's hands shook imperceptibly as she adjusted the service cart. Carter's brow furrowed as he placed a beverage tray on the wrong armrest, immediately correcting it with visible anxiety. John remained calm, serene, his presence a subtle gravitational force in the cabin. Every human reaction was a data point, every micro-expression a revelation. Suddenly, a minor technical alert blinked on the cockpit panel, indicating a fluctuation in auxiliary power. Captain Miller's face tightened as he glanced at the warning. He leaned forward, hands gripping the controls muscles coiled with attention. Even the minor anomaly heightened tension, amplifying the crew's awareness of observation. John noted each reaction with precision. Miller's grip, the flicker in Landon's eyes, Meredith's posture, Carter's hesitation. The storm had evolved from psychological tension to operational awareness. Rebecca Klein approached a first-class passenger to deliver a beverage. Her movements were meticulous, hands steady, but eyes flicking toward John. The passenger took the glass, oblivious to the dynamics unfolding. The subtle acknowledgement between Rebecca and John was imperceptible to others, but the psychological weight was immense. A junior crew member nearby hesitated to pass a meal caught between routine and the invisible scrutiny John imposed. The cabin had become a theater of micro-decisions, each one revealing character under stress. John leaned back, slightly observing the interactions, as a chess master observes a board. Every gesture, every pause, every glance was part of a larger pattern. His notebook filled with annotations, minute and precise crew responses to authority, passenger perception, behavioral anomalies. He allowed the flow of events to continue, letting errors surface naturally. The quiet tension in the cabin was deliberate, designed to expose assumptions and reveal the hierarchy of power under duress. A subtle shift occurred as the turbulence increased slightly, cups rattling on trays, a soft thud as a napkin fell. Landon cursed under his breath, the force of his authority cracking. Meredith's clipboard wavered in her grip. Carter's eyes widened, muscles tensing. John remained still, observing, cataloging, recording. The cabin, a confined space of observation, had become a live laboratory of human behavior, authority, and perception. By the time the beverage service concluded, the cabin was quiet, taut with unspoken awareness. John Whitman remained seated, serene, his calm a counterpoint to the crew's subtly fraying composure. The storm outside softened to a light drizzle, but inside the psychological tension remained charged. The first battle of observation, subtle manipulation, and controlled authority had been won. Each human actor had revealed themselves fully, every assumption, documented every misjudgment noted. John exhaled quietly, a slight smile tracing his lips, knowing that the next phase, the consequences, would unfold with precision, inevitability, and the silent inevitability of justice measured through awareness and calculated intervention. The first-class cabin hummed with a tense, almost imperceptible vibration as John Whitman remained seated in 1A, his notebook closed, now pen, resting lightly across its surface. The engines thrummed beneath the fuselage, a constant reminder that everything in the cabin was precariously balanced between routine and chaos. Outside the sky over Illinois was a blanket of thick gray clouds, the cityscape of Chicago just visible in glimpses through rain-streaked windows. Every reflective surface, every polished metal, every leather pod in the cabin mirrored the intensity of the human drama playing out in real time. Meredith Miller approached the galley with deliberate steps, her clipboard clutched against her chest. She paused, glancing at John with an almost imperceptible hesitation, her lips pressing together, as if trying to decide what could safely be said. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was controlled, but brittle. "Sir, I've confirmed with the system. There was an error, but Mr. Landon is awaiting confirmation for Seat 1A. If you do not move, I will have to call security to enforce the reassignment." The words were calm, measured, but the tension beneath them was palpable. John's gaze remained steady. He did not flinch, did not shift. His fingers hovered over his phone, ready to send a signal that would set into motion the next stage of his plan. Across the aisle, Landon's face was tight-forced composure, crumbling under the weight of scrutiny. He leaned slightly toward Meredith, whispering words that carried a thin veneer of authority, but no conviction. John noted the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted nervously to the cockpit. Even Landon's years of executive privilege could not shield him from the subtle pressure now anchoring the cabin. Carter, the junior attendant, adjusted the beverage trolley nervously, every motion precise yet tentative. Rebecca Klein moved past with trays, her hands steady, but her eyes flicking toward John with recognition, a silent acknowledgement of his presence and influence. John tapped his phone lightly. A series of encrypted messages triggered a prearranged protocol within Whitman Logistics. Within minutes, the operational interface began signaling a temporary hold on fuel deliveries to Horizon Air flights, departing within the next hour. Engines idling at the gates, refueling trucks paused mid-route. Nothing was overt. There were no alarms, no disruptions for passengers beyond minor delays that appeared entirely weather-related. But internally, the airline's supply chain, the very arteries of their operations, were frozen. Every manager with access to logistics immediately noted the hold a subtle shockwave rippling through operations, a test of protocol patience and human assumption. Captain Miller's eyes narrowed as he observed the minor fluctuation reports coming across his panel. He had been in control for decades, yet even he sensed that the situation in the cabin was not merely routine. He glanced toward the flight attendants, noting their hesitation, their nervous glances. The calm of the engines was in stark contrast to the tension building silently between passengers and crew. The captain's voice remained measured as he addressed the first officer. "Watch the cabin. Pay attention to seat 1A. There's something about this passenger." Meredith Miller returned to John, her stance rigid now, but less assured. "Sir Security has been notified if the seat is not vacated within the next few minutes. We will be forced to escalate," she said. John looked at her calm, almost serene, but the intensity in his eyes carried a weight far beyond mere words. "Proceed with protocol," he replied softly, and in that single instruction, the latent authority embedded in Whitman Logistics' operational network began to ripple outward, quietly but inexorably.
The hum of the cabin was punctuated by subtle gestures. A junior attendant moved slightly too slowly, glanced at the cockpit, adjusted a cart in hesitation. Landon's hand twitched against the armrest, fingers tapping a rapid rhythm, betraying internal panic. Carter shifted weight repeatedly, a nervous tick unnoticed by most passengers, but not by John. He catalogued every micro-reaction, every subtle tremor of authority and control. Each human response was an input in a broader algorithm of consequence and accountability. Minutes stretched, elastic in tension. The turbulence outside had intensified slightly, shaking cups and napkins across trays. Minor disruptions that would normally pass unnoticed. Landon's voice rose slightly as he barked instructions to junior attendants. But the usual obedience was fractured. The crew hesitated, glanced at one another, and subconsciously deferred to John's calm presence. He remained seated, serene, the center of an invisible gravitational field that subtly realigned the cabin's hierarchy without a single explicit command. John reached for his notebook once more, recording the subtle frictions. Landon's smirk faltering, the way Meredith shifted weight, Carter's hesitant movements, Rebecca's careful gestures. Each note was precise, a map of human behavior under stress. Then he sent another brief message. The Whitman Logistics interface confirmed operational response. Fuel trucks paused, scheduled deliveries on temporary hold. Alerts to ground operations triggered for review. A ripple of internal alarm began quietly in the airline's operations center, unseen by passengers, but registering in real time on every manager's screen. A subtle plot twist occurred when a junior flight attendant attempted to adjust a tray near Landon, knocking slightly against his seat pod. The jolt was minor, almost accidental, but Landon's reaction was disproportionately sharp. His exclamation, a low hiss of frustration, echoed softly across the aisle. The gesture revealed his unsteady command over the unfolding dynamics. John noted it instantly, recording a mental marker of human fallibility exposed under pressure. Carter flinched nearby, hands freezing mid-motion, eyes darting between John and Landon. The storm outside continued, rain striking fuselage with rhythmic insistence, occasional flashes illuminating the tarmac. The plane's auxiliary power monitoring indicated minor fluctuations, inconsequential mechanically, but psychologically amplifying the tension. Each minor environmental anomaly acted as a magnifying lens, intensifying human perception, revealing bias, weakness, and assumption. John's mind catalogued every event, every glance, every micro-reaction. Finally, a flight attendant approached with a message from the cockpit. Procedural clarification for passenger seating. Meredith's hands shook as she passed it to John, almost imperceptibly, but he noticed. He read it quietly, folding it neatly into his notebook. Every procedural note, every human hesitation, every subtle recognition had been captured. The stage was set. The quiet storm of observation and strategic positioning had reached its apex. Outside the cabin, through the rain-streaked windows, ground crew paused mid-motion, unaware of the operational ripples affecting their routines. Within minutes, scheduled fuel deliveries remained halted, triggering a chain of cautious evaluations and internal communications within Horizon Air's operations team. John had not acted overtly, had not raised his voice, yet the consequences were immediate and measurable. Minor operational disruptions, a realignment of perceived authority, a silent, but undeniable assertion of power. John sat back, his posture relaxed, hands folded, expression serene. The cabin remained tense, crew movements careful, passengers subtly aware that something extraordinary was unfolding. Every human reaction, every shift in tone, every hesitation had been observed and catalogued. The storm outside softened slightly, pale gray dawn creeping across the wet tarmac. Yet inside, the controlled tension remained charged. John Whitman had quietly, methodically transformed the environment. Observation had become strategy. Authority had become subtle influence. By the time the beverage service concluded, a clear pattern emerged. Crew members' assumptions were exposed, biases revealed, and the cabin hierarchy had subtly realigned. John's presence, calm and deliberate, had reshaped human behavior without a single overt confrontation. Landon's confidence was fractured. Meredith's authority was tempered with caution. Junior attendants moved with precise awareness. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside. Quiet, inexorable, and perfectly controlled. As the plane taxied toward the runway, engines humming steadily, John's phone buzzed with encrypted confirmations. Operational interventions on the ground had been recorded, communications triggered. Each ripple of consequence, each reaction catalogued, would form the foundation for accountability and resolution. He exhaled quietly, a faint smile tracing his lips, knowing that the next stage, the execution of consequences and resolution of human errors, would unfold with precision and inevitability. The first battle had been fought with patience, observation, and quiet authority. The storm had not erupted. It had been orchestrated with invisible control. Every micro-reaction a testament to human fallibility under subtle pressure. John Whitman remained seated, serene, the epicenter of a quiet revolution in perception, power, and accountability. The stage was set for the next phase, and it would be decisive. The first hint of consequence arrived in the form of a subtle notification on the airline's internal operations dashboard. John Whitman's prearranged signals had triggered protocol. Fuel deliveries scheduled to the aircrafts at Chicago O'Hare and Midway had been temporarily delayed. The planes sat idling at their gates, engines humming. But the tugs, the carts, and the fuel trucks were held in place by pre-authorized instructions from Whitman Logistics. Ground operations managers blinked at the notifications, adjusting schedules, rerouting personnel, trying to reconcile the sudden halt with standard operating procedures. The system's automated alerts pinged insistently, each one escalating the sense of disruption without ever spilling into chaos. Inside the cabin, Meredith Miller and her team could sense something was wrong without understanding why. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her scarf, eyes darting toward John. He remained seated, calm, eyes scanning every movement, every micro-expression, every flicker of doubt. Landon's fingers drummed nervously against the armrest, the confident mask he had worn for decades beginning to crack. Even junior attendants like Carter moved with measured precision, aware for the first time that authority was no longer dictated by title or uniform, but by the quiet assertion of awareness and presence. The passengers murmured among themselves, a low ripple of tension spreading through the cabin. A few discreetly recorded the scene on their phones, the small red lights blinking silently, capturing every hesitation, every flinch, every incongruous gesture. The hum of the engines, the occasional rattle of service carts, the soft vibration from the wings all became background to the psychological theater unfolding in first class. John's eyes remained fixed on the crew, cataloging every deviation, every sign of bias or misjudgment. Meredith approached cautiously, clipboard in hand, lips pressed thin. "Sir, if you continue to refuse relocation, security will be instructed to escort you to the rear of the aircraft." Her voice was steady, controlled, yet brittle beneath the surface. John did not react overtly. He leaned slightly forward, eyes unwavering. "Proceed as you must. I am seated in my assigned location, fully compliant. Any action taken against me will be recorded and reported, and I assure you, it will have consequences." The calm certainty in his voice pressed against the crew's assumptions like a tangible weight. At the back of the cabin, Carter's fingers froze over the beverage trolley. Rebecca Klein's hands trembled subtly as she adjusted a tray, and Landon's jaw tightened as he realized the implications. He leaned toward Meredith, whispering in urgency, but the words fell into the ambient hum, unheard by anyone but the immediate observer. Each movement, each hesitation, each whispered exchange revealed vulnerabilities, exposed human flaws under pressure. John's quiet authority had become the gravity around which the cabin orbited. From the cockpit, Captain Miller's eyes flicked repeatedly between the flight instruments and the cabin. He had been at the controls for decades, yet a subtle unease had crept in. Auxiliary systems reports indicated minor anomalies in power distribution. Nothing dangerous, nothing critical, but sufficient to amplify the crew's tension. He exhaled, hands tightening slightly on the yoke, aware that something about Seat 1A defied expectation. The invisible influence of John Whitman's presence had penetrated even the well-ordered cockpit hierarchy. Below, on the tarmac, the temporary hold of fuel deliveries caused managers to convene hurried conference calls. Dispatchers rerouted personnel, adjusted schedules, confirmed contingency plans. The airline's operations, normally a well-oiled machine, now carried the first ripple of unexpected disruption. Nothing catastrophic, yet the message was clear. A single passenger could affect operations in ways the staff had never anticipated. John's orchestration had remained silent, indirect, but entirely effective. In the cabin, Meredith returned to John's row, hesitant. "Sir, you need to understand that if you continue to refuse relocation, the airline can take formal action." John's gaze lifted, calm, piercing. Formal action is appropriate when rules are broken. No rules have been broken here. I am compliant. I am a paying passenger. I am within my rights. Any escalation will reflect the errors and biases of those taking action, not of myself. The words carried weight without aggression, and the crew felt it. The subtle shift of power was undeniable. Carter adjusted the beverage trolley carefully, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone, hands moving precisely as though each step was being evaluated under a microscope. Rebecca Klein followed procedure meticulously, yet her eyes betrayed acknowledgement, a recognition that the usual assumptions about authority had been disrupted. Landon's confident swagger had diminished to a measured, anxious posture, fingers tapping nervously. Meredith's lips pressed into a thin line, the authority she once wielded with certainty, now tempered by the invisible influence pressing against her. A minor turbulence rattled the cabin, cups clinking softly, napkins fluttering, and the psychological effect was amplified. Landon muttered a curse under his breath, glancing toward the galley. Meredith adjusted the service cart, hesitation evident in her every step. Carter's movements were almost imperceptibly rigid. John's eyes noted every detail. Each micro-reaction became a confirmation of the pattern he had been observing. Biases revealed, authority questioned, human error made visible. Minutes later, a subtle alert from the operations dashboard indicated that several flights scheduled to depart within the next hour were affected by the hold. Ground operations managers scrambled to reroute tugs and carts, adjust scheduling, and communicate with flight crews. The disruption was orderly, controlled, but undeniable. Each ripple reinforced the lesson. Assumptions about status, appearance, and authority could be tested, and misjudgment had consequences. John Whitman did not raise his voice, did not make a scene, yet his presence had initiated a cascade of accountability. A passenger across the aisle shifted, inadvertently jostling Landon's arm. The man flinched, muttering under his breath, his composure cracking. Carter froze, unsure whether to intervene or continue. Rebecca Klein's hands paused mid-motion, a slight widening of the eyes betraying awareness. John allowed the moment to exist, a subtle acknowledgement, without any outward reaction. Each event in the cabin now served as data, a record, a lesson in human response to authority and pressure. The storm outside began to clear slightly, light spilling through the rain-streaked windows, illuminating the cabin in pale grey. Yet inside, the controlled tension remained. John Whitman remained seated, calm, a still center in the swirling uncertainty of human behavior. Crew members moved cautiously, aware that the usual assumptions of hierarchy had shifted. Landon's arrogance had fractured. Meredith's authority had been tempered with doubt. Carter moved with deliberate care. Rebecca Klein's glances communicated silent acknowledgement. John's encrypted messages confirmed that the prearranged protocols were in effect. Ground operations were responding. Operational managers were reviewing schedules, anticipating adjustments. The ripple effect of his quiet intervention was unfolding, orderly yet undeniable. Each reaction, each subtle hesitation, each minor misstep had been recorded, documented, and would later inform the consequences. Finally, the first-class beverage service concluded. The cabin was silent, taut with unspoken understanding. John leaned back in seat 1A, serene, hands folded, eyes sweeping the crew and passengers with careful attention. The initial battle had been fought entirely through observation, controlled pressure, and subtle demonstration of authority. The consequences for misjudgment, bias, and arrogance were now primed, ready to manifest in the next phase of action. Every participant had revealed themselves fully. Every assumption had been tested. John Whitman exhaled, a quiet smile tracing his lips. The storm had not erupted, yet the inevitability of consequence hung in the air, like electricity before a lightning strike. The engines hummed steadily, a low, persistent vibration beneath the cabin floor that no one could ignore. John Whitman remained in seat 1A, hands folded lightly across his notebook, eyes sweeping the room with an almost imperceptible precision. The subtle tension in the air was palpable. Every passenger, every flight attendant, even the captain in the cockpit, felt it without realizing its source. Outside, the rain had slowed to a fine mist over the tarmac, the city lights of Chicago refracted into streaks against the slick asphalt. The plane seemed suspended between calm and the storm John had orchestrated quietly, invisibly, for hours. Meredith Miller approached again, her movements careful, almost cautious. The clipboard in her hands trembled slightly, a micro sign of the uncertainty gnawing at her. "Sir," she said, her voice level but brittle, "the airline has requested that you reconsider your seat assignment. They are prepared to escalate security if compliance is not met." John looked up, calm, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that seemed to anchor the room. "Proceed as you must," he said softly, voice steady, measured. "Any action taken against me will be fully documented, and I assure you, it will have consequences." His gaze lingered on her, not threatening, not accusatory, but utterly unyielding. Across the aisle, Richard Landon's confidence faltered. His fingers tapped a rapid rhythm against the armrest, betraying his unease. He leaned slightly toward Meredith, whispering under his breath, but she avoided eye contact, her posture stiffening as if bracing for something she could not name. Carter, the junior attendant, adjusted the beverage trolley nervously, conscious of every subtle movement in the cabin, aware that the invisible hierarchy had shifted. Bosse Klein moved past with trays, hands steady but eyes flicking toward John in silent acknowledgement of the authority he exerted without a word. John tapped his phone lightly, initiating the next phase of the plan. A series of encrypted messages were sent to Sarah Jennings and David Ross, triggering operational protocols at Whitman Logistics. Fuel deliveries to Horizon Air flights scheduled in the next 2 hours were paused. The trucks remained at the depots, engines idle, drivers standing by with cross-armed stances. unaware of the silent command directing their actions. The ripple through operations was immediate yet invisible, measured and precise. Within minutes, managers across 3 major airports noticed irregularities. Confusion arose, not panic, yet the undercurrent of disruption began to show. From the cockpit, Captain Miller's eyes flicked repeatedly between instruments and cabin. He had decades of experience, yet unease crept in. The auxiliary power fluctuations, minor but persistent, combined with the crew's hesitation, created a ripple of tension. He leaned forward, hands resting lightly on the yoke, muscles coiled. "Keep an eye on seat 1A, he said quietly to his first officer. "There's something about this passenger." Davis, the first officer, nodded, unease etched into his features. The invisible influence John carried had reached even the cockpit. Subtle, quiet, yet unmistakable. Meredith Miller returned, voice lower, attempting to regain composure. "Sir, if you continue to refuse relocation, security will be forced to intervene." John's eyes lifted, calm, steady. "Security is appropriate only if protocol is breached. No breach has occurred. I am compliant, sober, and fully within my rights. Any escalation will reflect on those enforcing it, not on myself." His words pressed against the crew's assumptions like gravity, invisible yet undeniable. The cabin crew moved with caution, aware for the first time that authority was no longer a function of title or uniform. Carter's hands trembled slightly as he passed a tray. Rebecca's movements were precise, eyes flicking toward John as she measured every action. Landon's jaw tightened, the confident mask fracturing further. Every reaction was being observed, recorded mentally, and catalogued for the consequences yet to come. A minor turbulence rattled cups and napkins, a gust through the fuselage that would normally pass unnoticed. Landon muttered under his breath, frustration audible but impotent. Meredith's hands adjusted the service cart, hesitation in every step. Carter froze mid-motion, uncertain whether to proceed. John's gaze followed each micro-reaction, noting the flaws, the assumptions, the human vulnerabilities exposed under pressure. Minutes later, an alert pinged from John's phone. The temporary hold of fuel deliveries had taken effect. Operations managers at multiple airports scrambled to reroute vehicles, adjust schedules, and communicate with crews. The disruption was orderly but undeniable, enough to register as an anomaly without drawing public attention. Every ripple, every subtle consequence had been triggered by John's quiet orchestration. The cabin remained calm outwardly, yet the tension inside had thickened, a living organism responding to the invisible force of observation and authority. A subtle human twist occurred as a junior attendant misaligned a tray near Landon, knocking lightly against the seat pod. The man's exhalation, sharp and frustrated, carried across the aisle, breaking the composure of the crew. Carter froze mid-step, unsure whether to intervene or correct it. Rebecca Klein's hands paused, eyes widening imperceptibly. John allowed the moment to exist, a quiet acknowledgement, recording everything without a single overt action. Each reaction had become evidence, each micro-failure a marker for future accountability. The storm outside began to clear slightly, the dawn light reflecting off wet tarmac and glinting aircraft surfaces. Inside, the tension remained, charged, deliberate. John leaned back slightly, serene, a calm eye at the center of a subtle hurricane. Crew movements were precise, cautious. Landon's arrogance had fractured. Meredith's confidence was tempered by doubt. Carter moved with deliberate care. Rebecca Klein's glances communicated silent acknowledgement. Every participant had revealed themselves fully. Every assumption about authority and bias had been exposed. At the moment the beverage service concluded, John tapped his phone once more. The signal confirmed that Whitman Logistics' operational protocols had been fully engaged. Fuel trucks were on hold, ground crews had been notified, and monitoring channels confirmed every procedural adjustment. A chain reaction, subtle but effective, had begun cascading through the airline's operational network. The crew remained unaware, passengers oblivious, yet consequences were already in motion. John closed his notebook, hands resting lightly on the fold-out table. He exhaled slowly, the faint curve of a smile tracing his lips. The first battle had been fought entirely through observation, controlled intervention, and strategic placement. The storm had not erupted. It had been orchestrated with patience, precision, and an invisible hand. Human error, bias, and assumption had been exposed. The stage was set for the next phase, the tangible consequences that would follow once the plane landed, once operations and accountability intersected. The engines thrummed steadily as the plane taxied slowly toward the runway, rain-streaked windows reflecting the pale light of dawn. The cabin was taut with unspoken awareness. John Whitman remained the quiet center, calm, measured, watching every micro-reaction, knowing that the unfolding fallout would reveal more than just misjudgments. It would expose character, authority, and the consequences of underestimating the invisible power held by those they assumed powerless. The first act of revelation was complete. The consequences, inevitable and precise, were about to begin. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane taxied toward the runway, engines humming steadily. But the tension in the air had shifted from subtle observation to anticipation. John Whitman remained in seat 1A, calm, composed, his notebook now closed on the fold-out tray, hands resting lightly atop it. Outside, the mist over the tarmac reflected the fluorescent glow of the runway markers, creating streaks of pale light across the wet concrete. Ground crew moved efficiently, unaware that every vehicle, every fuel truck, every tug was now subject to a controlled operational hold. A quiet message from a man whose influence extended far beyond the visible cabin walls. Meredith Miller approached again, the clipboard in her hands now pressed against her torso like a barrier. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the cockpit, and then to John. She exhaled sharply, a small tremor betraying the uncertainty she had fought to suppress. "Sir, security has been notified. If you do not comply with the reassignment, we will be forced to enforce it." John's eyes lifted slowly, steady and deliberate. Security is appropriate only when there is a violation of protocol. There has been none. I am compliant, sober, and fully within my rights. Any escalation will reflect on those taking action, not me. His tone carried no aggression, yet every syllable pressed against the crew's assumptions like an invisible weight. Across the aisle, Richard Landon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, fingers drumming a rapid, nervous rhythm against the armrest. His usual arrogance, the confidence he carried into every first-class cabin, was beginning to crack. He leaned toward Meredith, whispering in desperation, but she did not meet his gaze. Carter, the junior attendant, adjusted the beverage trolley with painstaking precision, aware of every glance, every shift in posture. Rebecca Klein moved past with trays, hands steady, but eyes flicking toward John repeatedly, silent acknowledgement of the subtle authority now at play. John tapped his phone lightly, triggering the next phase of prearranged protocols within Whitman Logistics. Alerts pinged across operations centers at 3 major airports. Fuel trucks remained idle, engines off, drivers standing by, waiting for instructions. Scheduled flights were delayed, not catastrophic, but enough to send a ripple of operational alarms through Horizon Air's network. Managers scrambled, trying to reroute, adjust schedules, and reconcile the sudden hold with routine expectations. Each subtle disruption was a measured consequence of decisions made based on false assumptions. In the cockpit, Captain Miller's eyes flicked between the instruments in the cabin. He had been flying commercial aircraft for over 30 years, but unease had crept in, subtle and unspoken. Auxiliary power fluctuations, minor turbulence, and crew hesitation created a web of psychological pressure he could not ignore. "Keep an eye on seat 1A, he murmured to First Officer Davis. "There's something about this passenger." Davis nodded, eyes wide with apprehension. The invisible presence of John Whitman had infiltrated even the hierarchy of the cockpit, and the subtle shift of authority rippled quietly but undeniably through the aircraft. Meredith returned, her voice quieter, less certain. "Sir, we may need to escalate if you continue to refuse relocation." "Security is prepared." John's gaze met hers, steady, unwavering. "Any escalation will reflect your errors in judgment, not mine. I am fully compliant. Any action against me will be documented and reported." The gravity of his words pressed against her assumptions, reshaping them, testing the boundaries of authority and obedience. The first ripple of human consequence arrived subtly, but unmistakably. Carter dropped a tray slightly, causing a minor clatter. Landon's face flushed with frustration, a whisper of irritation escaping him. Rebecca Klein's hands froze mid-motion, eyes flicking to John. Each gesture, each hesitation, each flicker of awareness was catalogued. The cabin had become a laboratory of human behavior under subtle but unavoidable pressure. John remained seated, serene, observing, calculating, his presence a gravitational field reshaping the crew's dynamics without a single raised voice. Minutes passed. A minor turbulence rattled the cabin, cups clinking softly, napkins fluttering. Landon muttered under his breath, his confidence faltering further. Meredith adjusted the service cart, hesitation visible in every movement. Carter froze mid-step, caught between procedure and perception. John's gaze followed each micro-reaction, recording, analyzing, understanding. Every subtle error, every visible stress response, every unconscious glance became part of a growing map of consequence, a record that would inform the next stage. Outside, the tarmac crew had begun to respond to operational alerts. Fuel trucks remained stationary, gate personnel adjusted schedules, and managers began conference calls to understand the anomalies. No passenger could see the ripple. No casual observer could trace the chain of cause and effect. Yet within the airline's internal network, the first tangible consequences were in motion. John's silent orchestration had begun to manifest in real-world operations. A subtle human incident unfolded as a junior attendant misaligned a tray near Landon, causing a minor collision with the seat pod. Landon flinched, muttering sharply, and the gesture revealed his fraying control. Carter froze, unsure whether to correct it. Rebecca Klein's eyes widened faintly, a small, conscious acknowledgement of the invisible force at play. John allowed the moment to exist without intervention. Observation alone had begun to reshape human behavior, subtly, irrevocably. The storm outside softened, light grey dawn spilling across the wet tarmac, illuminating puddles and reflective surfaces. Inside, the controlled tension in the cabin remained charged. John leaned back slightly, serene, the quiet center of an intricate web of psychological pressure and operational consequence. Crew members moved with deliberate precision. Landon's posture was rigid, confidence fractured. Meredith's movements were cautious, tempered by uncertainty. Carter's steps were measured. Rebecca's glances communicated silent acknowledgement. Each participant had revealed themselves fully. Every assumption about authority, bias, and competence had been exposed. Finally, the first-class beverage service concluded. John tapped his phone once more. Encrypted confirmations showed that all operational holds were active, that ground operations managers were responding, and that internal notifications had been sent to airline executives. The subtle ripple of consequence had taken root. Each reaction, each hesitation, each minor error was documented and would later form the basis for tangible accountability. John exhaled quietly, a faint curve of a smile tracing his lips. The first phase observation, strategic pressure, documentation, was complete. The storm had not erupted with noise, but the potential for consequence hung in the air like static electricity, charged, inevitable. Every human action had been observed. Every assumption about power and control had been tested. The stage was now set for the first tangible fallout. Disciplinary actions, operational adjustments, and the beginning of accountability that would transform the crew, the airline, and the perception of authority within the cabin. The engines thrummed steadily as the plane taxied to the runway. John's gaze swept the cabin one final time. Crew and passengers alike were caught in the quiet tension of inevitability. The operational interventions on the ground would unfold shortly after landing. Mistakes made in judgment, biases displayed, and assumptions held by Landon, Meredith, and the junior attendants would soon meet their consequences. The storm had been silent, invisible, controlled, but the fallout, precise and deliberate, was imminent. John Whitman remained seated, serene, a master orchestrator of accountability and justice, watching the first real results of his quiet, calculated strategy begin to emerge. The first tangible consequences began to ripple through Horizon Air even before the wheels had fully lifted from the runway. At the fuel depot in O'Hare, drivers remained on standby, engines off, trucks lined in neat rows, waiting for authorization that would never come until Whitman Logistics released the hold. Dispatchers and logistics managers scrolled through alerts in disbelief, recalculating schedules, calling pilots, reassigning tugs. Every minor adjustment triggered further questions up the chain of command, and every question, in turn, exposed human error, misjudgment, and the subtle cracks in authority that John had been observing all morning. In the cabin, the tension became almost palpable. Landon's posture had stiffened to the point of rigidity. His jaw clenched and unclenched as he scanned the aisle, hands tapping an uneven rhythm on the armrest. Meredith Miller's face betrayed the same unease she had tried to mask for the past hour. Carter, frozen at the beverage trolley, moved with slow, deliberate steps, careful not to draw attention, but unable to hide the knowledge that something larger was in motion. Rebecca Klein adjusted a tray, eyes flicking once more toward John, silently acknowledging that the quiet, composed man in the hoodie was far from ordinary. The encrypted messages John had sent minutes ago triggered the airline's senior operational managers to convene a rapid virtual meeting. Phones buzzed, screens blinked, and voices overlapped in hurried attempts to assess the disruption. Flights scheduled across the Midwest and East Coast were delayed, minor at first, but with the potential for exponential disruption if not resolved. Managers tried to reroute fuel trucks, coordinate with airport operations, and maintain the schedule. Each decision was hampered by the operational hold, and each misstep provided a real-time demonstration of human assumptions failing under pressure. Back in the cabin, the junior attendant's nervous energy spread subtly to passengers. Whispers, glances, and small gestures betrayed unease, though most travelers were unaware of the full scope. Landon leaned forward, muttering to himself, his voice tight with suppressed panic. Meredith adjusted her grip on the clipboard, glancing at the cockpit, at the trolleys, at John, calculating risk and compliance. Carter's hands shook slightly as he handed a glass of water to a passenger, eyes flicking to the passenger in seat 1A, knowing that the slightest misstep could be observed and recorded. John leaned back in his seat, hands folded, eyes scanning the cabin like a camera lens. Every subtle reaction, every hesitation, every sign of stress was catalogued meticulously. The crew's micro-movements, gestures, and shifts of weight became data points in a complex evaluation of human behavior under stress and authority. Landon's arrogance was fracturing. Meredith's posture was tense, her usual precision compromised. Even the passengers, oblivious to the full orchestration, felt the faint undercurrent of authority John radiated. The quiet command of presence, outweighed any overt assertion of power. Meanwhile, on the ground, the ripple of operational consequences began to accelerate. Flights scheduled from Midway, O'Hare, and Milwaukee were delayed in sequence. Gate personnel scrambled to communicate with passengers. Operations managers recalculated fuel logistics, and supervisors tried to coordinate alternate arrangements. The temporary suspension of fuel deliveries had caused enough disruption to ripple across multiple airports without triggering chaos, a controlled but unmistakable demonstration of authority in action. John's subtle orchestration had transformed into measurable impact. In the cockpit, Captain Miller and First Officer Davis monitored the minor anomalies with growing unease. The auxiliary power units showed no critical danger, but the unusual delay in fuel notifications and ground coordination was enough to spark concern. Miller's decades of experience gave him a measured approach, but even he could not ignore the subtle pattern emerging from Seat 1A. The calm, deliberate observation, coupled with operational precision, had begun to shift the balance of influence within the cabin. Meredith, now aware that her authority was subtly undermined, attempted to regain composure. She approached John again, voice tight but controlled. "Sir, I must reiterate, security is authorized to enforce the reassignment if non-compliance continues." John's gaze met hers, calm but intense. "No violation of protocol exists. Enforcement would be a reflection of your errors, not mine." The words carried the same quiet authority that had held the cabin in check for the past hour. The subtle power dynamic was clear. Assumptions about status, appearance, and privilege had been tested and found wanting. Landon's hands clenched, tapping the armrest faster, the movement betraying his frustration. Carter adjusted the trolley slightly, careful not to make contact with anything, aware that John's watchful presence was calculating the smallest human errors. Rebecca Klein continued her duties, maintaining professional composure, yet her eyes flicked repeatedly toward John, signaling silent acknowledgement of his command over the situation. Each member of the crew had revealed their assumptions, biases, and vulnerabilities, and John had catalogued each for the consequences to follow. At the rear of the plane, a young passenger continued recording the interaction on a tablet, the red light blinking silently. Unaware of the scale of authority behind the passenger in Seat 1A, the child became an unwitting witness, documenting every hesitation, micro-expression, and misjudgment. John allowed the recording to continue, understanding that evidence, even digital and subtle, would later serve to illustrate the errors in human judgment and institutional assumptions. Outside the plane, ground crews adjusted schedules, rerouted vehicles, and attempted to reconcile delayed operations. The fuel trucks remained stationary, engines off, drivers waiting for clearance that would not be granted until John's strategy dictated. Operational managers scrambled to communicate with airport authorities, adjust staffing, and reconcile passenger itineraries. The disruption was significant yet controlled, invisible to the casual observer, but unmistakable in the ripple of activity through the airline's infrastructure. John's phone buzzed lightly. Another message confirmed that all operational holds had been activated, that all communications channels were monitoring the disruptions, and that preliminary reports of misjudgment and bias among the crew were being recorded. The ripple effect, subtle at first, had now taken tangible shape. Each misstep, hesitation, and assumption was now measurable, forming the foundation for accountability once the flight landed and the immediate operational window closed. In the cabin, tension continued to ripple. Landon's arrogance had been tempered by repeated micro-moments of vulnerability. Meredith Miller's posture remained tense, clipboard held like armor. Carter's hands continued to tremble slightly, every gesture calculated, deliberate. Rebecca Klein's movements were precise, her glances toward John acknowledging the unspoken authority he held. The first-class cabin, normally a domain of privilege and assured control, had become a crucible for human judgment and accountability, orchestrated silently by a man they assumed powerless. By the time the beverage service concluded, the plane was aligned for takeoff. The storm outside had faded to a light drizzle, grey morning spilling across the runway. Yet the cabin remained charged with controlled tension. John leaned back, serene, observing the ripples of consequence spreading through the crew and operational channels alike. The first visible outcomes of his quiet orchestration had been realized. Minor delays, operational confusion, human errors revealed, and assumptions about authority challenged. The engines roared to life, the plane accelerating along the runway. John remained seated, calm, a quiet center in a storm of subtle disruptions and human vulnerability. Each crew member had been observed, every micro-failure documented, and every assumption challenged. Outside, the cityscape blurred past, but inside, the consequences of bias, misjudgment, and arrogance had begun to manifest, setting the stage for the next phase. The landing, the reports, and the tangible accountability that would reach from the cabin to the corporate offices of Horizon Air. The quiet storm John had orchestrated was now visible, undeniable, and irreversible. The stage was set for justice, accountability, and the consequences that would forever alter the perception of authority, status, and power within the first-class cabin. The wheels touched the runway with a soft thud, the plane decelerating as the engines adjusted, the vibrations settling through the fuselage. John Whitman remained in seat 1A, calm, his eyes sweeping the cabin one last time, noting every micro-expression, every gesture, every tremor of authority that had unfolded during the flight. The cabin crew, each member tightly wound, moved with careful precision, aware that their decisions, small as they had seemed, were now subject to scrutiny that extended far beyond the metal confines of the aircraft. Meredith Miller's hands gripped the clipboard with a white-knuckled intensity. Her posture was rigid, shoulders squared against the weight of observation and impending accountability. Landon's fingers tapped incessantly against his armrest, the rhythm a quiet testament to growing apprehension. Carter's movements remained measured, hesitant, while Rebecca Klein's eyes flicked toward John with acknowledgement and an almost imperceptible nod. The cabin had been transformed into a crucible of human judgment, and the subtle authority John wielded throughout had reshaped the dynamics entirely. As the plane taxied toward the gate, John activated a final series of encrypted communications with Sarah Jennings and David Ross. Instructions went to operational teams on the ground. Document the behavior of the crew, confirm all procedural compliance, and prepare for immediate review upon landing. Fuel trucks remained on hold. Maintenance crews were instructed to log every anomaly, and managers at multiple airports began receiving alerts that would later trace back directly to decisions made in the cabin. The ripple effects of subtle observation had now become tangible and operational. Meredith approached cautiously, her voice barely above normal conversation. "Sir, security is ready to escort you if necessary." John lifted his gaze, calm, unyielding. Security should only be exercised if a violation of protocol occurs. None has occurred. Any escalation will reflect on those initiating it, not on me. The words pressed against the crew's assumptions like gravity, invisible but undeniable. Landon's confidence had fully fractured, his posture rigid, jaw clenched. Carter continued to maneuver the trolley with meticulous care, hands trembling slightly. Rebecca moved with perfect efficiency, glances toward John, acknowledging the authority he projected, without a single overt command. Outside the aircraft, the tarmac crews prepared for the arrival of the fuel trucks that had been temporarily held. Gate personnel adjusted schedules, flight operations managers recalculated sequences, and supervisors relayed status updates up the chain of command. The controlled operational disruption was orderly, calculated, and undeniable. John's subtle orchestration had transformed the seemingly ordinary logistics of the airline into a living demonstration of accountability. Small misjudgments, human assumptions, and biases were now visible in the wake of his quiet intervention. The cabin door opened as the plane came to a complete stop. John remained seated until the signal was clear, then rose slowly, deliberately, surveying the crew. Meredith stepped forward, clipboard still clutched, hands tight around the edge. "Sir, please follow me to the rear for debriefing." John's expression remained calm, composed, yet the gravity of his presence was almost physical. Every step Meredith took toward him carried hesitation, uncertainty, and a flicker of recognition that the authority she had assumed was now contested. In the terminal, airport security approached, not with aggression, but with procedural caution. John's movements were deliberate, measured, every gesture reinforcing the quiet command he had maintained throughout the flight. Each crew member observed, noting the subtle weight of presence, aware that their actions would now have immediate consequences. Landon's posture shifted, his earlier arrogance replaced by tension and the first taste of accountability. Meredith's shoulders tightened. Carter's hands remained precise, but his steps carried the unmistakable weight of observation. At the operations office, managers had begun compiling reports, each one detailing anomalies in protocol, hesitation, and error. The first tangible results of John Whitman's orchestration were now emerging. Crew behaviors, previously unnoticed or dismissed, were catalogued with clarity. Operational disruptions caused by the temporary hold on fuel deliveries had forced a re-evaluation of human decision-making, revealing vulnerabilities in the assumptions of authority that had been unchecked for too long. John's quiet intervention had now manifested into measurable outcomes, operationally, psychologically, and socially. Back in the cabin, John signaled for the crew to gather. Meredith Miller, Landon, Carter, and Rebecca Klein assembled near the galley, each standing with careful attention, a mixture of apprehension and realization etched across their faces. John spoke, voice calm, even, but carrying an unyielding weight. "Every decision you made, every assumption, every hesitation has been observed and documented. Today was not about punishment alone. It was about awareness, accountability, and understanding the impact of your actions under pressure." He paused, letting the words settle, the cabin quiet, the weight of reflection pressing down. The operational hold, the delay of scheduled flights, and the documentation of behavior are all measures to ensure the airline maintains its obligations to passengers and staff alike. Errors, bias, and assumptions will no longer go unchecked. Landon shifted uncomfortably. Meredith's lips pressed into a thin line. Carter's posture straightened, careful, measured, eyes flicking toward John. Rebecca nodded subtly, recognition and acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment. The airline's executives, informed in real time by the operational alerts triggered during the flight, began reviewing the preliminary documentation. The first tangible fallout for the crew was already being assessed. Individual actions were scrutinized, policies re-evaluated, and preparations made for procedural and human resources consequences. John's strategy had moved from observation to operational and personnel impact without a single overt confrontation. Each reaction, hesitation, and misjudgment had been used as data for realignment, accountability, and correction. Outside, the city lights reflected off the wet tarmac, the morning haze softening as daylight increased. Ground crews, managers, and logistics personnel moved with careful awareness, recalibrating schedules and anticipating the delayed sequences initiated by John's protocols. The operational ripple extended beyond the plane itself, reaching to multiple terminals and flight schedules. What had begun as a subtle observation in the cabin had now transformed into a systemic demonstration of consequence and authority. John returned to seat 1A, calmly observing the reactions of the crew as they began to process the weight of accountability. Meredith Miller exhaled slowly, her hands unclenching the clipboard, posture relaxing fractionally as comprehension settled. Landon slumped slightly in his seat, frustration and realization mingling in his expression. Carter's measured movements began to align with procedure, his confidence tempered with awareness. Rebecca Klein adjusted a tray with precise efficiency, glances toward John confirming acknowledgement of authority and oversight. The quiet storm of observation had produced tangible outcomes in real time. By the time passengers began disembarking, the implications were clear. Crew members were aware that errors, biases, and misjudgments had been documented and would carry consequences beyond the flight. Ground operations had been forced to acknowledge the operational hold, analyze the disruptions, and reconcile schedules. The ripple effect of John Whitman's subtle authority had become concrete. Tangible operational and human consequences now existed, each directly traceable to the quiet interventions during the flight. John walked down the aisle with deliberate composure, carrying only his duffel bag, every step measured, eyes scanning the cabin one last time. The first-class section had been transformed from a domain of assumed control into a living laboratory of human behavior, authority, and accountability. Crew members and passengers alike carried the silent awareness that the balance of power had shifted, subtly, irrevocably, and invisibly. Every assumption had been challenged, every misjudgment noted, every consequence set in motion. As the doors opened onto the jet bridge, John paused, looking back at the cabin, the quiet smile tracing his lips. Observation, patience, and strategic precision had reshaped human behavior and operational systems alike. The plane's hum, the residual tension, the recorded micro-reactions, and the operational holds all converged into a single narrative. Accountability, consequence, and justice, executed with precision, patience, and subtle authority. If this story inspired you to think differently about awareness, human behavior, and the quiet power of observation, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more compelling storytelling, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts on moments when authority and patience revealed truth.